and welcome to another episode of The Influential Nonprofit. I am your host, Mary Anders. I am here today with Gauri Manglik. She is the CEO and co-founder of Instrumentl, and I love what they do. And I was just saying to her, I don't know if I know of a company that does what they do, which is helps nonprofit grant seekers. It's prospecting, tracking, and management all in one place. And so she's going to talk today about what their company does, and also like trends and things that nonprofits can do to write better grants, especially around quality or quantitative data that you can use to really help you show yourself in the best light. Would that be correct?
Yeah, that's great.
I'm not telling lies, I hope.
No, not at all.
Okay. All right. So I always start the podcast with the first question, which is, tell me something that you're proud of that you don't get to brag about that often.
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I would say like one of the things I'm most proud of right now is certainly Instrumentl and where it's come to date, and what's top of mind for me in terms of specifically within that, like what I'm proud of is that we, as a team, we've really built a culture that is very respectful and kind. And that's something that's a big part of how we operate. I want to make sure that that you don't dread being in a meeting with anybody, that you're not afraid you're going to get yelled at and whatnot. And that sounds like really obvious, but as we've hired more people, I've just seen people come from all different types of like work environments. And it's really, I feel really glad that we've been able to foster that type of work environment where I feel like people can almost like drop their baggage, so to speak, and just focus on the work and the customers and Instrumentl.
Right. What I'm hearing is there's like a foundation of trust, you know what I mean, and safety to be able to just say things, right? And then but trust and safety also comes with like respect, right? And how you say things and how you connect with people, and that's so amazing, because what I'm hearing is maybe there are some people that came out of cultures that weren't like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they have to kind of like unlearn some things and relearn some things. And yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I feel like I spend a good amount of time at work, at least a third of my life. And I definitely don't want to work in a place where I feel like I just don't enjoy the people that I work with or enjoy the meetings that I'm having and the conversation that I'm having to, as much as possible.
Yeah, for sure. So when did you start the company?
Yeah, so I started it with two co-founders a while ago, and it's taken a lot of different iterations since then. Initially, we got started around 2016. At least that's when I got involved, and my co-founder Angela and Kat, they got started a little bit earlier in a different iteration. So we initially started as a crowdfunding platform for female scientists. That was like way back when. It was like hosted on WordPress, and the initial mission there was to help researchers, especially female researchers, get funding through crowdfunding. And then we kind of went through many iterations to now focus on the nonprofit market and focusing on helping nonprofits win money through grants. So we like changed our customer segment focus, and we also changed the funding source that we were helping folks get money from.
And what was the inspiration to serve nonprofits in this way?
So again, my two co-founders, Angela and Kat, they had been circling this problem from a lot of different perspectives. So they had like the academic research perspective. They had both written grants as grad students, and that's where we initially thought we would start. But both of them had also worked in the nonprofit market. So Angela had worked as a funder, giving out grants, and also at a nonprofit writing grants. And then Kat as well had worked at a nonprofit writing grants on the development team. And so they both had circled this problem, and they just felt like it was super inefficient. And initially got started in the academic research world, but because of their knowledge of the nonprofit space as well, we were able to see that what we had initially built that we thought was really great for academic researchers was actually a better fit for nonprofits, because it's actually people's jobs at nonprofits to find and apply and grow the institutional fundraising pipeline. Right. Whereas for an academic researcher, that is not literally their job. It's not what they're getting paid to do.
Right. It's like something they have to do. Right. And okay, so one of the things that you're stressing here in this little prep form you gave me is it's more important than ever to leverage quantitative insight to the funders that you're applying for. And so first of all, I would like to say, what are you seeing like, what are you seeing the struggles are in doing that, like in nonprofits, and like really either capturing or presenting the data that they have?
Yeah, well, I would say that I guess overall, if you zoom out, grants are a great funding stream to consider for many nonprofits once they get past a certain threshold of robustness. And however, like grants as a whole it's getting competitive, right? Because more and more data is getting more public, partially because of tools like Instrumentl, and in the information silos are getting removed. And so that increases the need for just making sure that you have access to the best data so you can make the best decisions on which funders to pursue, and make sure that you have a strategic and systematic process for actually applying, incorporating feedback, reapplying, building relationships. And that's not something that's kind of left for granted. It's not like an ad hoc process. And then related to that is that you actually need to be able to kind of demonstrate robustness of your programs so that you can be set up for success to receive more funding. And funders are going to want to actually fund your program over others.
Okay, something you said, because I see sometimes a lot of young or startup nonprofits, and they want to get grants because they're not good at fundraising. They don't have a base of support. But one of the things you said was like a certain level of robustness, right? It's like having some kind of track record, right? That and that's what I'm seeing is like, or what I was hearing from you were saying is, this may not be the place for people who are just getting started, who don't really have a data or track record or that certain level to present a case for funding.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you think about like raising money from an individual like me or you, like we can be really excited about a story and maybe the personal connection, and that can really get us to make some donations. But when you're going after an institutional funder, they're going to have a higher bar for you to clear, because they're going to they have more of an institutionalized process on their end, and they often are giving out larger sums of money. So they're going to want to make sure that they're giving their funds to an organization that has some sort of history, demonstrated history of success. And so part of that is at the organizational level, with making sure there's like a clear vision and mission at the organization. Part of that is at the programmatic level, making sure there's some history of being able to deliver success on your program, so they can feel confident they can give you, $10,000 or $1 million, and you're going to know what to do with it. And then part of it is also capacity. So like making sure that you have the capacity to do the things that you say you're going to do in that grant program, so that you can build a great long-term relationship with that funder, send them those reports of your impact, and then continue to have this funder be excited about funding you.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And are there people who fund like startups or not?
Yeah, there definitely are startup grants.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a piece of what you can find on Instrumentl. So if you are a startup nonprofit and you have the knowledge and the expertise and the capacity to pursue grants, those would definitely be the ones to seek out first, those smaller grants, those startup grants.
Right.
But I would say as a whole, the majority of institutional funders do tend to be a bit more risk averse.
Right. Yes, for sure. And so by institutional funders, what does that mean?
Yeah, good question. It typically means funders that there's like a number of different types of funding entities. So it could mean government funders, so federal funders, or state or city local government funders. It could mean private foundation funders, or it could mean corporate funders.
Okay.
Those tend to be the three largest buckets.
And what do you feel like in those three buckets, like who is the least and most risk averse?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that it really can depend on the funder, but I would say like foundation funding and corporate funding is where you can find some funders that have less stringent requirements, application processes that are a bit smaller, and usually government funders will be harder to win, and they'll have more complex reporting requirements. So if you're going to pursue those types of funders, you're going to really want to make sure you have the capabilities in place to deliver on them and to track things properly and all that.
So what do you feel like is, there's grants is one of several revenue streams, right? Like, yeah. And all healthy businesses, yours, mine, nonprofit, we have diverse funding, right? Like diverse revenue streams. Do you feel like people can come overly dependent on grants? Or, I mean, is there a dark side or caution around seeking and getting funding through grants?
I would say that the most common pitfall that I see around that is an over optimistic understanding of what it takes to win grants for earlier stage nonprofits, which can take up like an disproportionate amount of like time and struggle that doesn't really need to be the case. I think once you have your pipeline up and running, I think the key is just to make sure that you are able to continue to invest in that and build those relationships and continue to deliver those reports. But I actually haven't, I mean, in terms of all the customers that we've worked with, grants are generally not the biggest portion of funding, the biggest channel of funding that they receive funds from. I've seen anything from like, as low as 5% to like 50%, but I feel like organizations really see it as a part of a whole strategy.
Right. Okay. And because most philanthropy comes from individuals.
That's right.
Right. Like that's where most of the money comes, just from people like you and me. And I feel like they're to younger organizations, I think they think, oh, it's like all grants and stuff. Like, no, there is some of that, but it's the majority is just people giving money. All right. So how does your tool, your company serve organizations? Like, because in the prospecting, tracking, and management, and do you also help them write it? Is that part of the management?
We don't help them write it today, but that is something that is feasible for us to consider down the road. It's on our radar.
So what do you help them with?
Yeah, so we help them with, like you said, the prospecting, tracking, and collaboration. So on the prospecting side, we have the most comprehensive data set to start with active opportunities for nonprofits specifically. So when a nonprofit signs up for Instrumentl, they will tell us about their project, like a specific program, and the organization as a whole, and we will match them to relevant opportunities. Those that are active. And then also we will also match them to funders that maybe are not active, that maybe you need to build a relationship with. You can see that side by side on Instrumentl, and they're kind of separated out, which sounds like a small thing, but it's a really big thing, because in most other databases, you have to dig to figure out, is it invite only? Are they accepting applications? We make that really clear. And then we've built a workflow for you to easily have all the information you need about each opportunity or each funder right there. We'll tell you key insights about like things you can only find on Instrumentl, like how open is this funder to new grantees versus repeat grantees. And that's really helpful if you're trying to get your foot in the door, and will totally inform your strategy on how you try to connect with that funder initially. And then from there, you have the ability to like save those funders and opportunities and hide the ones that you think are not a good fit. And then almost like an inbox where you can like triage these things very quickly and then move them over to basically like a grant tracker or a calendar where you can start to build your pipeline from the matches that you've gotten on Instrumentl, as well as from opportunities or funders that you're aware of outside of Instrumentl. So you can also import that into Instrumentl and have it be your one source of truth. And then from there, there's a lot of features around collaboration and reporting. So like being able to add tasks for milestones as you're working through a grant, being able to share reports out with different members of your team, and really be like a central source of truth for grants, as well as a tool that helps enforce a level of like system and rigor into your process.
Yeah. So I'm gonna share with you that systems is not my strength, right?
Okay.
Like I have many talents, but I've never said like, hey, let's put this in a spreadsheet and see what happens. Like that's just not how my mind works. But what I'm hearing is that that's how your mind works, and you're probably very good at looking at how you can systematize, you know what I mean, and create processes for things. And I'm just going to say, a lot of people who are, let me just say, that is what you're doing and what you created. I think a lot of people who are like me, who are like leaders and connectors, like, you know what I'm saying? But we're not always the data person. So having that is like, oh my gosh, that's amazing, because and also, and I think I'm not alone in this, if I have a system, I will devote myself to it. You know what I'm saying? Like once I have it, like I'm in it. Like even how I create this podcast as part of this huge system, which took me a while to figure out, but once I get it, I'm like in, you know?
Yeah.
And so having somebody like, just as you're talking, like, oh my God, that must make it so much easier because all of those details, all of that tracking, it's all held there for you.
Totally. Yeah. And to like kind of further illustrate this, like once a lot of like grant writing courses and like educators, once they find out about Instrumentl, they will integrate that into their courses because the platform of Instrumentl almost like teaches you how to do grants. It teaches you how to set up the system. And that's part of like what we were keeping in mind as we designed it. We were thinking of like busy executive directors, development directors that are doing multiple things. They're not just doing grants. And so how do we make sure you have the right email reminders and notifications? And how do we try to like automate as much as possible the manual work that goes into the actual work of grants, but then also like trying to set up the system of grants.
Yeah. So you said something, you know, what are some trends or things like for organizations to look out for? Where do you think we're headed as far as grants go?
I think that grants are a like strong grant or strong fundraising channel to add to your overall portfolio. I don't think that has changed. I think one of the things that we saw during COVID was that you know, of all of the different channels that you have to fundraise from, institutional funders were the ones that really were able to step up during that time, as opposed to like individuals. You weren't obviously able to have events. You weren't maybe as able to get revenue from in-person program funding, in-person program services. And so we really saw the institutional world, especially the private foundation world, really step up during that time and make sure the priorities were aligned to what was most important at that time, but also to like overall increase funding. So, and it also, there was a lot of also great change that happened during that time because there was such a need to move quickly. And so we saw a lot of grant applications get simpler. We saw a lot more focus on equitable giving and a lot of changes that, you know, really like they really had to happen at that time, but hopefully will have more lasting impact beyond just like, you know, what changes were made during COVID.
I feel like that happened across the whole sector, maybe across every sector.
Mm-hmm.
There's a philosophy, or I guess, I don't know, practice. It's called Parkinson's law. And Parkinson's law means work will contract or expand to fit the time allotted, right? So if you give yourself 2 weeks, it'll take 2 weeks. If you give yourself 2 hours, it'll take 2 hours, right? And like what I heard you saying is like, okay, Parkinson's law, like, we have to get this money out fast. And all of a sudden, these application processes that were probably very long and lengthy got very, you know what I mean, much more streamlined. And they're like, wait, we could do this in this time. We don't have to, like, you know what I mean? Like really rethinking the processes because yeah, people did spring into action, and what was maybe a process that took a couple of months, maybe took a couple of weeks, and they realized, hey, maybe we could keep working like this instead of going back, you know? But I feel like when that happens because there's outside forces that, like, what I mean, force us to operate differently because we believe that it's going to take this long, right? Like, oh, this needs to say, and then these funders are like, well, maybe it only takes this much, and we like this streamline, and we're still getting the same outcomes, right? The qualified, you know what I mean? The people that we want to give money to, and they're using the money. So all good in less amount of time and more equitably, which I think is all wins in the process, especially simplifying the process, which can be really daunting and overwhelming, especially if you don't know how to navigate it.
Yeah, I like to say that, or I definitely hear you on the like external factors being a very helpful forcing function. I think in this world, white funders have a lot of power. They don't necessarily have a need to move quickly. Nothing bad is going to happen to them, right? They're giving away money. They're not making money. And so this was a good example of where there was an external forcing function that made that change possible.
Right. They created urgency, right? Your urgent need for the money does not constitute urgency on my part, right?
Right.
And that, you know, I was working with a group yesterday, and I was saying, like, just because you have a deadline to raise money doesn't mean that's a reason for me to respond with a gift, you know. I respond when I'm ready. And so I can see it happening the other way. What do you feel like is, I like to share like simple things like that people can do. What do you feel like is something someone could do from listening to this podcast right now to make their grant process or management just easier for them?
I think let's see. I mean, there's a couple of things that come to mind, but I would say if I were to give you like my number one and number two tips, it would be number one, be very discerning with the funders that you're researching that are like in your pipeline, and make sure that those funders are truly aligned to your mission and to that particular program. Sometimes folks can be overly optimistic about that, and I like to go from more of a pessimistic scenario, because there's a lot of funders out there. And if you can really get to a place where you can find almost no reason this funder can't fund you, and focus more of your energy on those types of relationships to nurture and those are applications to write, I think your overall success with this type of channel is going to be greater, because you're going to feel like less frustration. You're going to build more confidence as you go through it. And then the second thing I would say is to, again, really have some sort of system, whether it's on Instrumentl or whether it's on a spreadsheet or another tool. I would say to try to not have grants be something that's like more ad hoc, where you're kind of applying for things as they come across your desk or as somebody mentions it. I would really try to think about your long-term goals with grants, where you're trying to end up with for the year, over the next 2 years, and work backwards and try to understand how many grants does that mean that I need to apply for in a given month. Make sure your pipeline is full there, and then also try to understand what needs to be done to like make sure that your existing funders are truly in a good place to continue to renew, but just really having like an overall system for that.
Yeah, it really, like what I'm hearing is this really is all about the system. And it's so interesting because it's not about grants, but it's sort of the same thing. Like, I part of my revenue comes from speaking. And like, I'm thinking a lot of people work with grants. Like I was not being as systematic or strategic, like if something came along or and I just actually am starting to work with someone who does exactly sort of what you do, but for speakers, right? Like the prospecting, the systems, the management, the tenacity, like following up, like I know you don't, anyway. And when I figured out what they did, I'm like, so what do I do? And she's like, well, you just be you. And I'm like, what? What? Oh my God. But just feeling like, okay, there is a system and a process to this. And also one of the first things you said, talking about the matching, right? Like helping you find the qualified prospects, because if you find the right match, that, like you said, that makes everything easier. And the foundation directors in my career, I've worked with many foundations around their messaging and marketing. And almost every foundation director is like, I wish people would really read it and understand, because they're trying to make what they do fit in this with us. And it's really not a fit. And they wind up wasting a lot of time. And in this particular instance, this foundation director was very open and really liked people to connect with her personally. And she wanted to talk with them about, like what they did, because she didn't want them to spend a bunch of time on a proposal that they could never fund. And then, and so I feel like that matching thing is so valuable, because if you're, like I said, if you're starting with the most qualified prospect, then your likelihood of getting it is much higher, right? And then you're not spending your precious time, energy, money, intelligence on something that was really probably never going to work. So I hear what you're saying when you're saying like, oh, it's a pessimistic view, right? Like, and what I would say, that it's targeted, but really being honest about, is this a good fit for us or not? Because when we try to apply for stuff that we're not really qualified for, that says to me like, okay, there's a little scarcity mentality going on. Like, I got to get this, because I don't know where else this money going to come from. But if we just open up and say, okay, the money's out there, where can I, like just believing that the money's out there. And also like, how can I find the best qualified people? So what does it look like to be your client? Like, how do people sign up for that?
Yeah, it's super easy. You can just go to instrumentl.com. It's spelled instrument, the word instrument, and then the letter L.com. And we have a 14-day free trial where anybody can try us out totally for free. You don't even have to put in a credit card. So at the very least, you'll have 2 weeks, of the most comprehensive database of grants, and you can get matched to opportunities and pursue them. And then you can decide if it's something that makes sense for you longer term.
And then can you share your fees? Is that okay thing
Oh
to
yeah,
do?
sure. We have a couple different plans, and we have on the cheaper end, it's about $199 a month if you go monthly, and then you get a bit of a discount if you go annually.
All right. That seems very reasonable for what you do and the amount of money that could come into your organization for this.
Yeah, we like to say, like, if you just need to win one grant and it's like more than covered in most cases.
100%. And then you gave us a promo code today.
Yeah, so if you use the promo code of influential NP50, you'll get $50 off if you'd like to move forward with a monthly or annual subscription.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for doing that. And I put that code in the show notes if you're like driving and missed it or whatever. So it'll be in the show notes if you want to grab it. Is there anything else you want to share with audience or with the grant seekers and writers listening to you?
Totally. Yeah. If you are just getting started with grants, or if you just want more resources on how to be more successful with grants, we put a lot of free, high quality content out there on our blog. So it's just instrumentl.com/blog. We have events almost every other week with different partners in the space where we're just trying to make sure that all the great information about how to win grants is like out there and accessible to everybody.
So you do free, like you're saying, you do free like sessions or webinars or things like that on grants?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally free webinars where you can join in and learn from the experts in the space on all different topics on, how to write a grant proposal, how to make sure your prospect list is set up for success, how to make sure your grant calendar is set up, all around grants.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much. All right. So I have one last question. This is how I wrap up the show. Okay. So we're going a little bit off now. I love karaoke, and if I was in the Bay Area or you were in San Francisco and we, or you're in St. Louis and we wound up at a karaoke bar, what's your go-to song?
I think Bon Jovi, Living on a Prayer.
Oh.
There's nothing like yelling that out into a group of people,
and because everyone's yelling it right back.
Yeah.
And I do have like one of my favorite people in the world is John Bon Jovi. I just think he's awesome.
Yeah.
I think he's just like a really cool person. When we talk about like, what kind of, I did this exercise and we were talking about, it was around money and your relationship to money. Like, what kind of rich person would you want to be? I'm like, I want to be John Bon Jovi because he's like cool. He's still married to his high school sweetheart, right? He's got all these kids and he's funny on TikTok and I don't know. I just think he's cool.
Oh wow! So I would love on TikTok.
I would love for you to scream that with me one day. Thank you so much for being here. I think this Instrumentl is such a cool thing. For a lot of people who come into the nonprofit space were relationship builders, were visionaries, and so having a tool like this that just makes it easy to track all of this data and you know what I mean, and just keep those systems flowing is so important. So thank you for sharing it with me today. And thanks for just spending time, and thank you for your promo code for everyone.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. And that is it for us on this episode of the Influential Nonprofit. As usual, if you want to learn more about growing your influence, meaning how to get people you have no authority over to do what you want them to do, you can go to the influentialnonprofit.com, and I've got all kinds of goodies there around all the stuff I teach around growing your influence. And we'll see you next time on the Influential Nonprofit.